I've been doing these yearly top 10 videos for 10 years now. My first one was December of 2013. Yet this past year feels very special. 2023 is one of those years that feels like it'll go down in history as an all-time great year for video games. Living in it, we of course know that there were some really bad things that happened in the industry this year as well. Things that feel like they could be the start of a major retraction in the industry as a whole. But I really think that in terms of the games that got put out this year, we're looking at a year that will stand right alongside 1998 as a wildly, ridiculously good year for game releases. As such, I've had to leave even more games off my list than I usually would have, in a way that made some of the final cuts really difficult to make, even if I am pretty happy with my final list, which contains 10 games that I honestly believe I could unreservedly recommend to most people for one reason or another. And many more games that came out this year besides that just barely didn't make the cut. But enough stalling. Let's get into my personal top 10 games for 2023. Spider-Man 2 is a game that shows that iteration can work incredibly well. I often find myself in the position of being an outspoken champion of games trying weird new things, even within existing franchises, but sometimes you have a formula that really worked, and the best thing to do is to just tweak the next entry in the series to make it even better, and this game does exactly that. The most annoying parts of the first game, like the stealth missions as Mary Jane, are made significantly less annoying through the addition of the stun gun. The open world activities are all thoroughly improved to be less tedious and more fun, with more variety throughout all of them. Even the combat seems some minor improvements with tons of new additions and plenty of minor changes that improve the overall experience. But despite Spider-Man 2 probably being one of the best open world checklist type games I've ever played, it very much remains an open world checklist game. Remnant 2, much like its predecessor, manages to stand out in the crowd of Souls-likes. Lies of P just barely didn't make my list, but whereas that game liberally cribs from the From Software games, Bloodborne in particular, Remnant 2 instead chooses to go its own way, and to forge forward on the path carved out by the first Remnant. And Remnant 2 becomes the definitive Souls-like third-person shooter with mountains of loot, which means that it ends up feeling somewhere between one of the many Ubisoft games like The Division or the recent Ghost Recon games and a traditional Souls game. Toss in the randomization that the first game was well known for, and you have something that ends up being truly incredible to make your way through. Both the boss mechanics and the core class-based shooting gameplay itself shine bright here. And while you'll certainly run into some incredibly difficult to surmount boss-shaped walls here and there, that can be very frustrating to incredible lengths, especially when you just happen to roll the worst possible modifiers for those bosses. You're always able to break through though, either on your own or with the aid of some trusty co-op partners. The Talos Principle 2 is yet another great sequel that came out this year. While it certainly maintains the puzzling mixed with philosophy vibes of its predecessor, it deftly expands its scope significantly through the addition of actual secondary character NPCs instead of the terminals that the first game's philosophy was delivered through. The first-person puzzles, which are much like those in the first game, are quite good, the right mix of thought-provoking without being too frustrating or obtuse, but they're also largely very similar to those in the first game. The NPCs are where you see the really interesting additions, with an entire robotic society you are now immediately thrown into. And the dialogue choices you're given in this game, while individually largely inconsequential in terms of affecting your ending or anything like that, are also some of the most thought-provoking decision trees I've had to go through. Especially in terms of challenging you to actually pick a response that you feel is the most appropriate for you. This game doesn't really subscribe to the idea of so many dialogue choice-driven games that there are bad choices and good choices that set you down a virtuous or evil path. Everyone that you talk to has reasoning for their beliefs, and the entire robot society is all communally engaging in this sort of enlightened discourse fashion you'd expect from the game's Greek philosophy roots, where everyone, for the most part, is just calmly discussing the issues of their day together in a public forum, both in person and through the in-game social media. Everything is wrapped up maybe a little too neatly at the end for my taste, but the combination of the puzzles and the social aspect make this game a journey that's well worth taking. It really was a great year for exciting new puzzle games, with titles like Viewfinder just barely not making my list, despite its incredibly innovative and exciting mechanics. For my money, though, when it comes to exciting new concepts in puzzle games this year, it's really hard to beat Cocoon. At first, it seems to be a pretty standard puzzle game with core mechanics that admittedly feel very good. But as it slowly unveils its real core conceit to you, you realize that every single world in the game is contained inside of an orb that you can physically carry around other worlds. As you complete a world, you unlock more orbs. This world-in-a-world recursive mechanic is mind-blowing the first time you have to consider it, but the game also manages to implement it in a way that makes the puzzles so that you can very much wrap your mind around them in a comfortable way that doesn't break your brain too much. It even manages to maintain the simplicity as you collect more and more of those orbs, culminating in the final set of puzzles that use every single orb you've collected through the entire game, resulting in a delightful set of final puzzles that wrap up the game perfectly. This all happens in a stunningly beautiful set of worlds as well, with gorgeous art design that brings the game together in a great way. If you're a fan of puzzle games at all, Cocoon is both a revelation for the genre and a comfortably familiar entry in it. In the run-up to Armored Core 6, I think a lot of people were expecting it to take a ton of inspiration from more recent From Software games, like the Souls games, and especially Elden Ring. But, quite frankly, that is simply not how From Software rolls. There are clearly some modern luxuries that have been brought into Armored Core 6, but it remains an unapologetically old-school Armored Core in all the best ways. AC6 is entirely about getting the best builds you can have for different situations. You can swap out parts on your mech between missions, and you're going to need to if you want to be able to find the right combination of weapons and tools to be able to defeat the game's bosses. The short, fast-paced missions do offer perfectly packaged doses of adrenaline over and over again, and allow you to rapidly experiment with and iterate on tons of different builds, from incredibly light and nimble mechs dual-wielding submachine guns, all the way up to full tanks with enormous laser cannons and Gatling guns. It is an incredibly fun game on its own, even for multiple playthroughs, as it introduces fun new elements to missions you already played, and adds more and more story elements to a plot that is shockingly immersive and engaging. But much more than that, it is so exciting to see From Software continue to just make whatever it is that they most want to make, even after the crazy success of a game like Elden Ring. Instead of just doing something that would make them the most money, making a new Elden Ring, focusing entirely on the DLC, something like that. They're using that success to do what they really want to do, something that is incredibly rare in the big budget space these days. Super Mario Bros. Wonder is, in my personal opinion, the best 2D Mario game that Nintendo has put out since Super Mario World. These are very strong words, but the recent 2D Mario games just haven't done a ton for me. The original DS New Super Mario Bros. Was pretty great at the time, if not groundbreaking, but that franchise never evolved. It just grew more and more stale with each subsequent release. Wonder, on the other hand, brings the same mentality that Nintendo has brought to Zelda with its Switch games to 2D Mario. Experimentation and new ideas are the priority here. With the Wonder Flowers, every single level becomes a playground to try something wild and new. Not every idea in every level is an absolute banger, but as a whole, they have a vibe of a whole bunch of people sitting in a room and just brainstorming a bunch of ideas, then building levels that those weird ideas could fit in. While the Wonder Flowers are definitely the highlights, they also aren't the entire game, which does hold up quite well on its own, with solid mechanics, difficult and fun challenge levels, and an absolutely beautiful new art style that's all this game's own, with incredibly detailed animation that makes it stand apart from the homogeneity of the new Super Mario Bros. Series. If you've ever enjoyed a Super Mario platformer, even if you haven't played one since the SNES days, Wonder is the perfect place to hop back on the bandwagon and have an absolutely fantastic time. Hi-Fi Rush was definitely the year's biggest, most pleasant surprise for me. While I came to Evil Within 2 pretty late, I thought it was one of the best horror games I had played in recent memory, and an incredible pivot from the first game, so I was really excited to see what that studio did next. I definitely did not expect that next thing to be this. Hi-Fi Rush is a fantastic blend of rhythm and action mechanics that takes the implicit rhythm that you often find in action games like Devil May Cry and makes it explicit, with every action you take happening to the beat. It manages to thread the needle perfectly between not being too strict about your skill level in actually managing to hit those beats, while also rewarding those players who can make their moves right on the dot every time. Add to that a great cast of characters, a very well executed and fantastic looking art style, and probably most importantly for a music-based game, an incredible soundtrack with the perfect mix of original tracks and licensed music. In fact, in a lot of cases, the music tracks that are made for the streaming mode in the game are just as good as the licensed music you'd usually hear during a normal playthrough. Ultimately, Hi-Fi Rush is a game that is equally great for people who like rhythm action games and for people who love games like Bayonetta or Devil May Cry. And it's a showcase of what's possible when you let a big AAA team try their hand at something smaller and more unique. It's amazing that Alan Wake 2 even had a chance to exist. The first game certainly didn't rock the world in terms of sales or long-term success, despite critical acclaim, and there was 13 years between the two games. But if anyone could pull off a sequel that long in the making, it's Remedy, who even when they manage to whiff, like they did with Quantum Break, are always doing something interesting. With Alan Wake 2, however, Remedy is fully firing on all cylinders, and manages to seamlessly blend together all the pieces that make up the core of Alan Wake 2, and in fact, almost every game they make. The gameplay, the full motion video, and the absolutely incredible graphics, which make this game a showcase of what's possible both with current generation consoles and high-end PCs. When it comes to its narrative, it makes use of every single one of these elements to effortlessly move from silly and irreverent to incredibly frightening to deeply unsettling, and then all the way back around to silly again. And it's great at all of these things, easily being the silliest, most frightening, and most unsettling game I've played in recent memory all at once. Control was an incredible game a few years ago, both technically and narratively. And Alan Wake 2 is simply Remedy raising their own bar yet again. I am incredibly excited to see whatever comes out of this team next as they keep improving their process and output, and I hope they have the chance to make as many more games as they want. Tears of the Kingdom is a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild in the same way that Majora's Mask was a direct sequel to Link to the Past. And much like Majora, Tears of the Kingdom uses the existence of that baseline world as an opportunity for them to get really wild and weird. Despite the low power of the Switch, this game is one of the most interesting when it comes to innovative physics mechanics. Every one of the new magic abilities added to the game has been specifically designed to basically allow you to engage with the world as Breath of the Wild, but with even more freedom, if you can even imagine that. From stitching together vehicles with glued together logs to tunneling your way through tons of solid rock, the game is dedicated on every front to letting the player do almost anything that they can imagine doing. While the surface world is largely the same, something that garnered a lot of derisive comments prior to release, albeit with a ton of great new shrines to use the new abilities in, the best part of the new game experience can be found not in the sky, like all the advertising pitched everyone on, but actually underground in the depths, which are an incredibly innovative and fantastic addition that add a ton of new optional challenges, as well as some of the best secret finding that any game has to offer. Practically every minute of Tears of the Kingdom that I was playing out in the open world, I was loving it. The game falls a lot flatter in some of the big themed temples that you'll do, but those make up such a small percentage of the overall time that you'll spend in this game that it almost doesn't even matter. If this is what passes for a direct sequel for a Zelda game in this day and age, I cannot wait to see what the next full game from the team does sometime in the coming years. Baldur's Gate 3 came out of nowhere for a lot of people, and even for me to some extent. I was certainly excited for the game from the perspective of it expanding on the Baldur's Gate series and it being a new Larian game. But I kind of expected another game on par or a little bit better than Divinity Original Sin 2. But Baldur's Gate 3 is so much more than that. And not just because it was the Larian game that finally caught on with a wider audience. Baldur's Gate 3 is so successful at what it's trying to do because it is the closest thing that has ever existed in my mind to a true Dungeons & Dragons video game, or hell, any tabletop RPG at all. It adapts the mechanics of tabletop RPGs and specifically D&D in a way that replicates the experience in a standalone package the best that is possible. Obviously, there's the dice that literally exist in the game, but it's the game's script and narrator playing the part of the best kind of dungeon master that's really what does it. A dungeon master that is always open to letting you explore alternate paths, to find your own unique way to do the things that you need to do. It can be incredibly tempting to save scum your way through Baldur's Gate 3, and there's certainly certain dialogue roles that I did that for. But you miss out on so many incredibly cool alternative scenarios if you go that way. There are so many tiny little details tucked away in every corner of the game's world, and so many of those details that you will never see on just a single playthrough. The freedom that it allows you is so vast that at some point you actually do need to decide what kind of character you're playing and what decisions that character would make. The game really requires you to inhabit your character to some extent in order to get the most out of it. And that is perfect for the kind of game it is. A role-playing game that actually requires you to play a role to truly get what it is offering you. I really hope that the incredible success of this game allows Larian to do whatever they want for their next title, and I can't wait to see what it is, because Baldur's Gate 3 is not only my favorite game of the year, but a welcome, massive evolution for an entire genre.